Hi, I'm Kristin Molitor. Welcome to the Transforming Hearts podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Ministry Formation. We believe that transforming the church starts with transforming hearts. Join us as we explore ministry through the lens of relationship and accompaniment. Together, let's journey towards growth, healing, and transformation. All right. Hello, Father Boniface. How are you today?
Wonderful, Kristin. Great to be with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you on our podcast today. I think it'll be fun for our listeners to hear about the Institute for Ministry Formation, of which you are the director and founder of our institute. We have a lot of treasures that we offer the church, and I thought maybe you could just share a little bit about our institute today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to do that. It is a great joy in my life, and I think a treasure that's really been entrusted to us. It comes out of St. Vincent Seminary, which comes out of St. Vincent Archabbey, which is my archabbey, and therefore flows very much from my own monastic life, but also my work in seminary formation, and as the director of spiritual formation for the seminary, and as someone who has done a lot of spiritual direction from the first years of my priesthood 20-some years ago. It's really focused on forming the heart. It's the place that I love to live is in the hearts of others, and it's where I spend a lot of my time. And as I've had the chance to share the wisdom of my own spiritual father, Father Tom Acklin, in the book that we co-authored on spiritual direction, and then began to form a course and ultimately a program in spiritual direction. The Institute grew out of that sharing of the gift of accompaniment, really. Accompaniment which involves being with others, and especially at that level of the heart. And then as things have flowed out of the Institute from that center and formation and Catholic theology and catechetics, and then really sharing the gift of accompaniment and the gift of prayer from the heart with parishes and various organizations. It's really been beautiful to see how the Lord, in fact, has formed and helped our Institute to grow, and also very much with your assistance, Kristin, and the gifts that he's brought to us through you. So it's wonderful to share a little bit about the Institute.
I have benefited from the formation of the Institute for Ministry Formation. I both work at the Institute. I help form parishes and individuals, but I also received spiritual direction formation through the Institute. And Father Boniface, I just remember that first course, The Art of Accompaniment, which was just really transformational for me. What I really took away from was, skills in listening and being with the other person to help open up the heart, to help the people that we are accompanying open the heart to greater trust, greater vulnerability. And it's in this sharing of the heart where we experience really deep communion and connection with one another. And so that formation not only transformed the way that I walked with individuals one-on-one, but it also transformed my parish ministry, because it transformed the way that I started to set up small groups. How can we set up small groups in a way where we have conversations that are safe and vulnerable and connected, where we're not just talking about content, but really sharing our hearts? And so I just wanted to say that was one of the great gifts for me at the Institute, and I'm so excited to share that gift with others.
If I can just comment for a moment, that course that you mentioned, Kristin, the Art of Accompaniment, or we also call it SD1. It's the first course in the spiritual direction program, but we've really discerned it as the core of our offering for the Institute, and finding ways to share that course in its kind of fullest expression can bring you all the way to a master's degree, we might say, but also finding other ways to share that course in part has been what has led to talks and workshops in parishes to give people a taste of accompaniment, which, as you mentioned, has that central place of listening and knowing not just how to listen for content, listen for information, but really to listen at a deeper level, what we talk about a lot as interiority. What's happening inside of you? What's going on, not just at the level of maybe things happening to you, but how are you thinking about those things? How are you feeling about those things? How are you processing those things and developing a story around those things in your interior life? What are the things that I can't figure out from the camera view of your life? If I had a video camera following you around, what's not evident there, which only, in fact, you can share with me from your own subjectivity, from your own interiority, from the heart. And so that's really at the core of everything that we offer. That course is a course I would like everybody in the church to take in its full 2-credit form, a 24-hour of instruction form, as we teach it in a 5-day intensive or across the course of a semester. I would love for everybody in the church to be formed in that art of accompaniment. But also, as I mentioned, some smaller or more condensed or partial versions of that course are things that you alone and you and I together have offered also as parish workshops for 3 hours, or half a day, a full day, a couple of days, in some different forms to really share that art of accompaniment. I think it's a grace that Pope Francis has told us is something for the whole church in our time. And it's actually some insights that come out of your parish ministry that I've also repeated a number of times about the real desire for people to move to that level out of content and into the heart.
Yes. Yeah. Pope Francis did say in Evangelium Gaudium that he wishes that everybody be initiated into this art of accompaniment. That's a big call. He says everybody. So we may not all be called to become a spiritual director, but we're all called to journey alongside one another and helping each other grow. And I do think that there is a need for greater emphasis on relationships in this time in the new evangelization and in the church. I think that we're living very individualistic, very isolated, although social media platforms and our smartphones connect us to one another. There's still a safety net in the sense that I don't have to actually engage in relationship. I can do a quick update on how I'm doing or a quick snapshot of my life without the risk of relationship. But we really were created for relationship, created for communion. John Paul II says that we're the most in the image and likeness of God when we are in relationship with one another. And so I think that what can happen is we have this beautiful content that's coming out of the fruits of the new evangelization. Lots of content, Bible in the Year, for example. But sometimes we can grow in our faith individualistically. So I put my headphones in and I'm not really sharing the fruits of my heart or sharing what I've learned with others, that it can kind of stay isolated. And so I think that the big call right now in these quote unquote buzzwords in evangelization, such as accompaniment and hospitality, is to move us back into relationship and communion with one another. And so I don't think it's a buzz. These are buzzwords in evangelization. I think they really are movements of the Spirit to connect us to one another. I think sometimes at the parish we can have more transaction than transformation. For example, someone could come in and say they're interested in the church, and then we can say come back in a few months when the OCIA program starts. And yet, how can we begin accompanying them even now? How can we begin a relationship with them even now? How can we even be curious about their faith journey, where they're going, what's happening in the heart? And I think that's just the direction of accompaniment is moving towards another.
And Certainly there was a more of a challenge perhaps in the 80s, the 90s, when we didn't have as much content. There were a few well-known teachers in the church that found some media platforms to share things about the catechism or going deeper into the scriptures or opening up different dimensions of the faith. But we're really so saturated with content now. And so I think relationships are important even for taking in the content. Three different ways come to mind. One is what content even to take in at this point. We're really looking for a trustworthy guide through the massive databases of the Formed platform or the Hallow platform or just the wealth of things that's available on the internet. So even having somebody who can lead us through and invite us to listen to this thing or that thing, it's been a fun part about our friendship, Kristin, is some of your invitations for things for me to listen to and to learn from, and I think vice versa. So relationships are really helpful even for taking in the content, but then also at the level of being able to receive. And sometimes we talk about a window of tolerance. When we're feeling threatened, when we're in an environment that we're feeling uncomfortable and our defenses are up and we're a little bit on guard, and that can happen in more significant ways. We talk about moving into fight or flight. And certainly when we feel very threatened, those experiences can become very elevated. But across a spectrum, even a mild threat level can really prevent us from hearing, even though we're physically hearing something, to actually take it in, make room for it, learn from it, because there's a real vulnerability in listening. And to be vulnerable in listening, to trust a speaker, a teacher, we need to have a certain trust level, a window of tolerance, and that helps in relationship. Being in relationship, it can expand that window of tolerance so that we can take in more. And maybe our listeners can think of when you attended a talk or you attended a lecture or you were talking with somebody else and you were with a close friend who helps you feel comfortable and safe, then you're able to hear more, take in more, process more. So at that level, and then also related to what you mentioned, Kristin, I think being able to process, to talk through what we learned and to understand how it integrates into my life, when I can share it with someone, when I can speak it out to someone that I know and trust. So this is the experience of coming home from a talk and someone says, well, what was it about? And then you have to put it into your own words and have somebody to share it with. And of course, that's not going to go perfectly. And if I feel like I have to prove it to someone, that's going to be a very different experience than if I feel like someone is on my side and ready to learn from me, and I can just find ways to express in my own words whatever it is that I just heard. So in multiple ways, even the receiving of content is just so dependent on having really deep, meaningful relationships. And certainly the relationship with spiritual direction is one form of that, and that's kind of a direction that the Institute grew out of. But then a lot of trusting relationships that have qualities of we might find in spiritual direction, but maybe more mutual and open, sharing the heart and developing that communion and intimacy is just tremendously important for our own spiritual growth.
Pope Francis talked about building relationships of trust through what's called like the apostolate of the ear, through vulnerable listening. And so I first heard this term vulnerable listening from you, Father Boniface, and maybe you can share a little bit about how we can listen vulnerably. I know that we kind of know what that means to share vulnerably. I'm sharing from the heart, my thoughts, feelings, and desires. But what does that mean to listen vulnerably, to really be affected by someone?
Yeah, it's I think a real contribution of our teaching, and I'll say I really got that idea from my conversations with Father Tom Acklin, my own spiritual father and the co-author of the Spiritual Direction book, that vulnerable listening, vulnerable attentiveness, that I'm actually opening my heart to make room for the other. I think we all know that ideas, and even more than ideas, but receiving a person can change me. It changes my life to hear from someone else, to take in and make room for someone else in my own heart. And to start at a simple level, if somebody tells me something I never thought of before, or tells me something that's different than my own ideas, that can have a significant impact on my life. That can really change me. And so really taking someone in at that level is a risk that requires trust. Am I going to make room for your ideas in my life? But then to take it at a deeper level, am I going to make room for you in my life? And you includes not only your ideas, which in fact you might be a little bit detached from, but then to take your heart into my heart. So that's your feelings, your way of processing reality, the things that are threatening or challenging for you. That might be, for example, a level of sadness, a level of pain. That might be a point of confusion or feeling overwhelmed. And it can be positive too, something joyful and exciting and something new and different. But to really take you into my heart, then I'm willing to do, as St. Paul says, to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And that's very vulnerable, because maybe I don't feel like weeping today. Maybe I don't feel like bearing your pain. I have enough of my own. Maybe I don't even feel like rejoicing or being enthusiastic about something that maybe I might be tempted to be a little skeptical about. Like, oh, all these happy, clappy people, I don't want to make room. I put up defenses. But to trust you enough to make room for your experience, your heart, your processing reality, your story, your way of seeing the gospel, your ideas, to make room for you in my life is a very vulnerable thing. And we feel that in the receiving, and we feel that in the sharing. When somebody is really willing to make room for us, that we don't have to prove ourselves and push ourselves past their defenses, but we receive an open welcome. There's something that's very affirming about my person in sharing with someone who is willing to receive me that way. So hopefully that makes that experience a little bit tangible for people, a little bit concrete for people, what that vulnerable listening can look like.
Yeah, to know that we're totally received, that the other person who is vulnerably listening, meaning they're open, helps us feel like I'm totally received. And I think that's the deepest desire of all of our hearts, is to be seen, known, and loved and understood. I think that sometimes it's really difficult to receive another person because we haven't dealt with our own fears and defenses. So what's it like to receive someone who thinks differently than me? Sometimes that can be really threatening. And so sometimes I feel like I have to change their point of view or change their mind. Really, it's love that transforms. It's love that opens the heart. It's love that allows me to speak a word of truth in a place that it lands. But so often I want to be quick to say what somebody should do or what somebody should try, like when they're revealing their problems or their sorrows or their point of view. We can be kind of antsy. I think that's also a place where we are in the church right now. If somebody says they're struggling in their faith, we might be really quick to point them to a podcast or a resource, which is really important. But how can we enter into it with them? So that's what Jesus, God with us, who became man, is with us. And we who are little Christs baptized into Jesus can be with one another. But vulnerable listening is going to require that it will ask a lot of me, that I really suffer with the other person. So often when somebody says they are struggling or grieving or sad or mourning or experiencing more tender emotions, we want to be quick to say, well, I'll pray for you. And that's good, but in a way that's a defense disconnect. We can be quick to say, have you tried this? Or quick to fix instead of opening to receive. And so vulnerable listening is a high ask of all of us, but it creates a beautiful communion and connection with one another when we're able to do that.
Yeah, one of the teachers that we reference in our classes is Brene Brown. She has a lot of beautiful teaching around vulnerability. And one of the videos we like to show is her little video on empathy. And she says that empathy requires us to connect with in ourselves something that helps us to understand what someone is sharing with us. And that can be hard. As you just described, I may not want to connect with something in myself that helps me to experience someone else's confusion or somebody else's feeling threatened or somebody else's depression or somebody else's experience. It requires me to connect into some deep places in myself. It's much easier to put up a hand and say, yeah, why don't you go talk with that person? Why don't you go listen to that thing? Why don't you go figure that out? And to distance ourselves from people's experience. And sometimes we do it because we have the idea we're supposed to have answers. We're supposed to figure this thing out. We're supposed to fix it. And we don't need to do that. Really, the most powerful healing, the most powerful growth happens through connection, just receiving a person, showing that we care, that we're in it with them, and just that acknowledgement, even saying, I wish I knew how to help you better, but I'm really grateful you shared it, and I'm glad to be in it with you, can make a big difference.
Yes, I think that our human experience as we come to understand that we're frail and we're vulnerable, and that can be a scary thing. It's hard for me to share where I'm insecure or where I'm wounded or where I'm struggling. To say, I feel like I don't belong, or I don't fit in, or I'm feeling very threatened, or I'm feeling whatever, insecure. Those are very little places inside of us that Jesus really reverences. But we want to put up defenses and strengths and be too good for those tender feelings. And I think like creating safe spaces where we can look at our tender and wounded hearts in those places where we feel very little, for them to be received just creates a beautiful healing within us to be received that way. And Father, you've often mentioned that, spiritual direction and prayer are just deeply connected. They flow into one another. The more that I have an embodied experience of being seen, known, and loved, the more confidence I can have in bringing those things to the Father in prayer. And so really, spiritual direction, it's not just about being a spiritual guide, but it's the relationship itself that heals and it is a real image of the Father.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, both for people who are receiving spiritual direction and people who might feel a call, or people are asking them for spiritual direction and they think, well, I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the clever phrases and the right catechism references or something like that. Well, that's not really it at all. To have a relationship, which is a special kind of relationship as we define it, it's a relationship between a director and a directee in which the principal reference point of the relationship is the relationship with God. So it's a relationship that's about the directee's relationship with God. And because of that explicit connection, that's what we do in spiritual direction, then all of the interactions between the director and the directee have a way of influencing the directee's relationship with God. So the things you can say in spiritual direction become things you can say in prayer. The ways you can open your heart in spiritual direction become ways that you can open your heart in prayer. The experience of love that you can receive in spiritual direction helps you to believe in the love that God has for you and to receive it in prayer. So we sort of practice relational pathways that then get repeated in prayer. And that's just a very beautiful experience of how spiritual direction can impact us, help us to grow.
And you and I have also geeked out over time that there's a real, what would you say, neurobiological effect that takes place in relationship. So a spiritual healing and even physically, where our nervous systems begin to experience safety in the presence of another. So often our primary attachment figures when we were younger maybe weren't always there for us. So our nervous system kind of stays in fight or flight when we're in relationship with one another. But really, like as an embodied creature made in the image and likeness of God, there are so many reasons why we were not made to go at this alone. Like even biologically, we experience a biological healing in the presence of another.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. There are so many ways that our bodies thrive when we're in healthy relationships, and especially relationships that are closely associated with tap into some relationships that may have not been the best in the past, may have been missing some dimensions or have had some triggers, some sensitivities that can get reworked in a new and related relationship. So yeah, a lot of healing, emotional, spiritual, and even physical healing can take place through a relationship, a really healthy relationship that spiritual direction can be.
And I know that our formation programs, we've had people who are obviously in training to become a spiritual director, but we've also had just anybody in any ministry take our programs. And one woman had said this formation just helped her as a wife and mother. And for that alone, it was worth it. So really, I just really believe that this formation can benefit the whole church, whether it's a few-hour formation session with our parish programming or the whole spiritual direction program, to enter into relationships that engage the heart, Father. I just really believe that this is such a gift for the church.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you, Kristin, and our other colleagues at the Institute for Ministry Formation, our embeddedness in St. Vincent Seminary and the support of St. Vincent College, and just a really robust institutional context that helps us to share these gifts with the rest of the church. It's one of our taglines, sharing St. Vincent Seminary, and particularly the formation resources, intellectual, pastoral, spiritual, and human formation resources of the seminary with the rest of the church. I'm just so grateful that we get the chance to do that.
So if our listeners want to learn more about our programming and our institute, they can go to www.imfstvincentseminary.edu and check out all of our resources there. Father, do you have any events coming up or things that you would like to share? Any events with the Institute that our listeners might be interested in?
Well, the Institute does quite a bit that you can find on that website, as you mentioned. And as we start the semester as well, there are a number of courses that are coming up. And I'm on my way in a day to the Spiritual Life Center in Wichita, where I'll be teaching the Art of Accompaniment course and holding a weekend retreat. And then you and I will be together at a Grief to Grace retreat. It's another beautiful ministry that we're really privileged to support and is so close to the things that we do in the Institute. Anyway, more events coming up in the coming semesters.
Well, Father, it's been a joy chatting with you today, and we'll have you on again to chat more about our Institute and, more importantly, about the heart.